My name is Monica Pons. This is the third episode of the Green Criminology Oral History project that we are conducting at the Green Group of the European Society of Criminology. I am here with Professor Avi Brisman. Avi is a professor at the School of Justice Studies at Eastern Kentucky University in the United States. Professor Brisman has also affiliations with Queensland University of Technology in Australia and the University of Newcastle in Australia as well. And in spring 2026, he will begin as a visiting professor at Edge Hill University in England. Avi, you have a wide range of research, but your primary focus has been on green criminology. In recognition of your work, in 2015, you received the Critical Criminologist of the Year Award from the American Society of Criminology, Division on Critical Criminology and Social Justice. You have multiple books, but your authored books include Monstrous Nature and Representations of Environmental Harms, a Green Cultural Criminological Perspective that you co-authored with Nigel South, Direct Action as Conceptual Art, an examination of the role of communique for Water, Crime and Security in the 21st Century, Too Dirty, Too Little, Too Much, co-authored with Bill McClanahan, Nigel South and Rhys Walters. Green Cultural Criminology, Constructions of Environmental Harm, Consumerism and Resistance to Ecocide, co-authored as well with Nigel South. Besides all the number of books that you have multiple articles and book chapters on green criminology that are very influential and cited. Your work has been translated into Arabic, Chinese, Italian, Persian, Portuguese, Slovenian, and Spanish. Before we go into talking about your books, your research, who inspires you, and so on, I'm going to start asking what brought you here. So, who is Avi Brisman? Where do you come from? What can you tell us about your childhood, adolescence, and how was your life upbringing?
Well, thank you, Monica, for inviting me to this interview and to participate in this project. So I am the child of two English professors. My mother has stopped teaching, but my father is still teaching at the same institution that he's been at since 1969. So I grew up in a house that was very academically oriented. To a large extent, I still think of a year as beginning in late August or September and ending in May. That's the academic calendar in the United States. I still think in terms of terms and semesters. I always have. I basically grew up on university campuses. In fact, I went to a nursery school, so like a sort of a free school kind of educational system that was actually on the campus where my mother taught. And some of the people who worked there were studying education. And so despite my best efforts to do something else, I pretty much only know what academic life is like. But my parents were always reading. There were always books in the house. There were always things that they wanted me to read. Sometimes I took their advice. I think they would probably say that more often than not, I didn't take their advice. But the notion of sitting with a book and reading has just always been natural to me. It's probably one of my favorite activities.
Okay. I have a massive question then. Why are you, I mean, how you are not an English professor?
Well, I think there are probably two answers to that question. One would be, I don't think it would have been a good idea for me to be in the same field as my parents. I think there would have been challenges. I think if I had worked in the same area as my parents, then I would have felt as if I wasn't doing well enough, or I would have felt maybe too too eager or too anxious about whether or not I was doing it well. If I picked a different area, then I might have been worried whether or not it was something that they would take seriously. I think there was too much concern, or there would have been too much concern as to whether or not I was doing what would be considered good academic work. So I guess that would be the first question, and that's probably the shortest answer I can give you for that purpose. But the second answer is that I think a lot of what I've been interested in lately is very much along the lines of the kind of work that my parents would do. In fact, a lot of the literary theorists and critics that they studied or that they worked with, or whom they knew and wrote with, are people that I read now. A lot of the literature that they found compelling or have found compelling are things that I'm interested in now as well. In fact, it's rather nice. A lot of times, if there's a source that I want, I can email my father and say, "Do we have a copy of this in the house? And if so, can you send it to me?" And it's much cheaper than going to the local bookstore and picking it up, or driving to campus to see if the library has it. So I guess in some respects, I'm coming back to the kind of work that they did, or entering into the world of the work that they did. But it took a number of years to get there. I probably had to do other things first to do that.
Okay, so for what you tell me, your family, your upbringing, your surroundings with the university shaped a lot your career and put you in line to become a professor. But you also traveled a lot and lived in many places. Has this influenced, has this any role or influence in your career? What did you decide to do? And if you can tell us a little bit about this.
Sure. So even though I've spent a lot of time at universities, when I was, I guess, in my late teens, I really thought I needed to experience a little bit more of the world. So I actually stopped my university studies. I lived on a kibbutz in Israel for about 6 months. I spent a year in Paris. Part of that time I was studying photography. So I wound up taking a little bit longer to finish my undergraduate studies than most people do. Certainly it took me longer than my parents would have liked. But I think it was very helpful for me to do things other than just sit and read and study. I enjoyed working with wood. I enjoyed working in the fields, which are things I did in Israel. I enjoyed welding. In Paris, I enjoyed photography. It was, I think, a different kind of interaction with the world around me. Certainly not as extensive a background outside of academia as some people have, but one that I think was an important part of shaping my relationship with nature, my relationship with cities, my relationship with people who are not native English speakers. So yeah, I think that's...
Okay, we are going to get back into this idea of how do you understand and see nature and so on. But first, I wanted to ask you if you could explain to us you studied photography, but what was your undergrad? What's your studies?
So I pursued a liberal arts education. So in the States, if one does that, one doesn't necessarily have to pick a subject or course of study when one enters a liberal arts college or a university. I went, when I started my undergraduate studies, I thought I would be interested in French literature and language, maybe philosophy or political science. My father thought that I should study psychology, probably because he thought I should study psychology. I didn't. I quickly realized that political science was not a field that I was going to excel in any particular way. So I had gone down this path of sort of French literature and poetry. and philosophy. But somewhere, I think during my second year of undergraduate studies, I became much more interested in art. Unfortunately, I was able to then study both art and French. And so when I finished my undergraduate studies, I thought I wanted to be a professional artist. So I went and received a master's degree in painting. But while I was doing that, I decided maybe that wasn't the career for me or the life for me. But I still love art. I still occasionally make things. I like to write about art. I like to go to museums. I think it inspires a lot of my thinking, even though I'm not an art historian. My sister is, but I think that's been something that's contributed to my thinking and outlook, is having had that experience being involved in the arts.
Okay, so where did you study the liberal arts part, the undergrad?
I studied at Oberlin College, which is outside of Ohio. It's a very small institution, kind of in the middle of nowhere. It has, I think, 2 or 3 streets, and that's about it. It's a very politically progressive institution. It was the first one to admit women in a coeducational environment, the first one to admit African American students. It's been very open and accepting of, I think, a wide range of political perspectives and orientations. And so I thought that might be a good place for me to go. I also wanted to be in a different part of the country. I grew up in the northeastern part of the United States, so upstate New York, Connecticut, but I wanted to get away. And so that was a good, healthy distance from my parents.
Okay, you also have studies in social anthropology. Was it your PhD?
Right. So while I was while I was studying painting, I took a course. I took a couple of courses in Northern Renaissance art, and I remember writing a paper on Petrus Christus, whose work I found very inspiring, spiritual, and I think my key point was probably on. And it wasn't a very long paper, it might have been 13 pages. And I think my key point was on page 10 in a footnote. And my professor said to me, if you're interested in putting your key point so far into the paper and in a footnote, you should go to law school. And I said, oh, that's a good idea. Will you write the letter of recommendation for me? Her husband was a lawyer, so I think she was fairly familiar with that kind of writing. But by that point in time, artistically, I became interested in issues of authorship and ownership. I tried to figure out ways of getting other people to make the art for me. So I'd come up with systems and then get viewers to be involved in that process. And so that led me to an interest in intellectual history. So it wasn't just a desire to write papers with lots of footnotes that me to law school, but it was, I think, an academically driven desire to think a little bit differently about art and authorship, ownership, creativity. So I went to law school, and I left law school. In the United States, it's a 3-year program. The first year, it's a pretty much prescribed list of courses that you have to take. And then after that, you can branch out into other things, specialize in different areas. And I quickly realized when I was in law school that the study of intellectual property is really part of a more business or corporate oriented kind of approach to law. And that did not appeal to me. But I'd always had an interest in environmental issues ever since I was maybe 16, and I read Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire. It's a book that influenced me and inspired me. And so I started taking courses in environmental law in law school. And I fell in love with the study of environmental law, the ways in which the administrative state either helps protect the environment or fails to do so. And so I left law school thinking I would be an environmental lawyer.
All right, and then, I mean, you have a very long I mean, you are influenced by many interests. You started to become interested in environmental law, but your PhD was not about environment-related issues. So how did you move to that other aspect of your life?
Right. So, so after law school, I worked for a judge in Arizona, a judge in Miami, Florida, and I quickly realized that while the study of law is fascinating in terms of its depth, in terms of the way we can interpret things, it's also limited to the law. And so there are lots of issues and problems in the world that can't be studied, can't be solved just through the legal system. So I started to feel as if looking at the world around me was somewhat restricted by what the law could do. And so it was around that time that I started working for an organization in Atlanta, Georgia, called the Metro Atlanta Task Force for the Homeless. That's back when you could refer to people as homeless rather than unhoused. The organization is no longer in existence, but the primary role that I had there was talking to these individuals who did not have homes and finding out about their experiences, interacting with police officers and other agents of the state. And that really made me think, I think, very profoundly about issues of power, issues of authority, structural issues, economic issues. But methodologically, I enjoyed the exchange. I enjoyed the interviews. I enjoyed the conversations. I enjoyed just hanging out with these guys, you know, on the street and talking. And so at that point in time, I pretty much decided I was going to pursue a PhD. And I had really the option of pursuing, I think, a degree in sociology or one in anthropology. But anthropology seemed more oriented towards ethnographic work. And I thought I would be better at that, or that would be more consistent with the kinds of conversations I had had with the poor, unhoused people that I had been working with. So I applied to a number of anthropology programs and decided to do my PhD at Emory University in Atlanta. And develop. Well, I was already in Atlanta at the time. They also offered a very good funding and financial package. And there were people there that I wanted to work with, professors that I thought would be good. My dissertation, so the PhD dissertation, we use the word dissertation, they use the thesis abroad, wound up being not about people without homes, but about young people and their interactions with the legal system. There have been plenty of cases that I had been involved with after law school, working with the judges about young people who were getting arrested or were getting punished, sometimes because of their lack of understanding of the law, or sometimes based on certain circumstances that they were in. And I really wanted to know, sort of, what did they think of the law? What did they understand? What didn't they understand? How did they imagine it? A concept called legal consciousness. And so that was what my PhD was on and about. So how did I get from there to criminology? Well, sort of two ways. One is that, or sort of the practical matter is that in the United States, anthropologists or students of anthropology are encouraged to study outside the United States. So they're told go off to Africa, go off to Papua New Guinea, go off to any place that's not the United States, and do in-depth qualitative ethnographic research. And I was particularly interested in the US legal system because that was what I was familiar with, and that's what I really wanted to focus on more. So my fieldwork was done in the United States, which I think produced at least a decent dissertation, but it was not the kind of work that would inspire many anthropology departments. They would not be interested in someone who specializes in legal anthropology
in the United
States. On the other hand, this was very consistent with some of the things that criminologists do. And so it found I think a different audience or a more receptive audience. There were also more job offerings in criminology.
And I mean, you're a criminologist in the United States, and you have a background on anthropology and basically qualitative research. How did you find this balance? There's not many qualitative, or at that time, maybe there was not many qualitative research going on in the United States. So maybe you could bring something like this merging between anthropology and criminology.
There was a point in time in which I thought I could work in that regard or try to get criminologists interested in anthropology or anthropologists interested in criminology. My professors at Emory said what you should be doing is getting anthropologists interested in your work, and you should be doing anthropology, not trying to build bridges or draw connections between fields. Whereas criminology, I think, is very much and others have said this before, a rendezvous discipline, a sort of meeting of people from different perspectives and fields. So it's been more open to that. There are plenty of people in the American Society of Criminology who will say that qualitative work is not as valued or as valuable. I do think that there's a methodological divide in the discipline, but it's never been one that particularly interested me. I just knew the kind of methodologies that I wanted to employ. I've done that, and if that resulted in work that people found compelling, great. If not, okay. There was only going to be so many methodologies that I would be able to learn and implement.
So at that point, you finish your PhD and you say, okay, I'm going to try to find a job in criminology. Why, how did you ended up in ECU?
So I should back up a little bit. At Emory, there's a building called anthropology, and there's a building called sociology. In fact, actually, at least at the time, it was written in stone of these two buildings, and they were connected underground. So you could literally go from one building to the other without walking outside. They could not have been farther apart in terms of interests and ideologies and anything for everything. I was not receiving a lot of support from the Department of Anthropology at Emory. The sociologists, on the other hand, were much more welcoming and encouraging to me. So maybe in hindsight, I should have just become a sociologist. But because I really wanted to do the ethnographic work and thought I could get better training on that in anthropology, I stayed where I was. I took a number of criminology classes in the Department of Sociology. One was with Bob Agnew, former president of the American Society of Criminology. known, I think, most for his work on general strain theory. I also took a couple courses with Elizabeth Griffiths, who's now at Rutgers. And both were just incredibly supportive, incredibly encouraging. I think they recognized what my interests were and tried to help me develop them and extend it, rather than try to tell me what my interests should be. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think Bob was the first person to encourage me to go to an ASC meeting. So whereas the anthropologists would say to me, you really shouldn't go to the professional organizations until after you've gone and done field work for a while. He said, no, Bob said, go start now. Next year's ASC is going to be in Atlanta. We're in Atlanta, so it's an easy way to go to that first conference. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot more support from criminologists. And so I started writing papers, publishing articles in criminology journals rather than anthropology ones. And that gave me, I think, enough of a background to be able to go on the job market and be competitive for criminology jobs. And so when I did, Eastern Kentucky University was one of the places that offered me a position. At the time, it was a very large department with some very prominent scholars. Since then, the department has shrunk a bit. A lot of those people have either left or retired, but it seemed like a good place to begin my my career as a criminologist, or at least a good place to start being a professor.
Okay, we'll got that.
Yeah.
As a professor, you said. Okay, mm-hmm. Your career as an academic, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you started, I mean, at that point you were already publishing on environmental crime, or you were focusing more on the legal system in the United States and the perception of or
I think at that point in time, I was all over the place. Everything was interesting to me, which is probably what should be the case when you're just starting out. I think the first ASCA I went to, I went to a panel for almost every single time period that was there, and it was all different kinds of things. Everything fascinated me because it seemed much broader than what I had done in the study of law or in the study of even anthropology. It's one thing I love about criminology is that it's a discipline that's oriented around a particular subject, but there's so much depth to that subject and then so many different theories behind that subject. Whereas anthropology is kind of the inverse of that. There's so many different subjects, but the theories tend to be more limited. And the approach to studying them tends to be more limited. So I guess the first year at ASC, I went to all kinds of different sessions. The second year was in St. Louis, and I had already heard about green criminology, know a lot about it. And actually, it was one of my sister's friends from her undergraduate studies who's gone on to be a very good sociologist and criminologist, Alexandra Cox, who said to me, hey, do you want to go check out this green criminology session? And I said, sure. And so there I heard a paper from Nigel South and one from Rob White. I think I asked a question in a Q&A afterwards. Afterwards, I very eagerly asked for their business cards. And that's back, I think, when people actually gave out business cards. They both gave me their cards. I immediately wrote them when I got got home, I sent them some of the sort of law-oriented articles I had written on environmental crimes. They responded and kind of took off from there. So I think I was very lucky to have Beth Griffiths and Bob Agnew introduce me to the world of criminology. And then I was very lucky to have Rob White and Metro South early on sort of welcome me into the fold and present me with opportunities to write with them.
I think it's fascinating because since then you focused pretty much on green criminology, and now you're one of the most prominent authors in the field. But you have all these other titles and backgrounds on. How is all the things that you have done before? I mean, we talked a little bit about that, like how art is influencing or literature is influencing now more than ever your green criminology career. But how do you see like photography and law and then anthropology and so on? Has this been instrumental in how you do or what you have been working on in green criminology?
Well, I should begin by saying that I've been very privileged to be able to have gone to the undergraduate institution that I did. Very lucky to then have pursued essentially 3 different postgraduate degrees. I'm very lucky in that regard, and I don't take that for granted. Most people don't have those kinds of opportunities. My parents were supportive. They are by no means exceptionally wealthy, but they always supported my educational endeavors and found ways to help me to the best that they could. Later, I would then take out loans or try to receive funding. But I realized that I was very lucky to be able to have this sort of I don't know, peripatetic kind of path, or this wandering in the desert, if you will. I think now obviously I can't extract any of my background from my history and find out what it would have been like not to have had that. I don't think I ever really draw on all of the different disciplines that I've studied at the same time. Mm-hmm. But for different projects, I may pull from one or the other. So to give you an example, so we're here in Washington, D.C., towards the end of the American Society of Criminology's meeting. Last night we had a poster session. And my poster, which it wasn't really a poster. It was 19 photographs, and they weren't all mine. It was a group of about 12, 13, 14 of us putting up images. The project that Michael Fidler and I had started, I guess, about a year ago or 2 years ago. We sort of talked about it at the meeting in Philadelphia in 2023 about whether or not we could do a poster in which we just had images. And if we could lead, it's actually called leading with the image. Could we put up the images, have those be the start of conversations and discussions, really removing any text, and seeing whether or not how that would work in an environment in which one often has their methods and then their findings, their hypotheses, mm-hmm. and all of that. So last night it was a bunch of photographs. And
which response did you get? I mean, have you seen that it was gathering interest and people was understanding what was going on?
It was a remarkable and very enjoyable night, other than the fact that it was oppressively hot in the room where we were. There were these 19 pictures that had been taken under the theme of images that offend. Now, what does that mean? Well, maybe the subject of the photograph is offensive to some people, but maybe it's offensive to the photographer. Maybe it's an image that was taken that the photographer thought would offend a viewer. So there was a lot of room for interpretation there. And so there was a steady stream of people who come by and look at this and say, well, what is this? And because they're not going through looking at the program and saying, let's say number 72, collateral consequences of conviction and imprisonment. Okay. And they just kind of walk around. And so people would come to this poster and all they'd see are pictures and no text. And they'd look at them. And me. And some of the images had words. So Anna Duranko.
The tourism one.
Yeah, hers says "fuck tourists." My student had one that they had done that says "fuck Trump." There were others that had sort of political messages that would be offensive to people of one political orientation, but not of a different political orientation. And then there were images of things that might not seem offensive at all. In fact, one of the images that I took was of a large piece of meat from a butcher shop in Malaga.
I remember when you took that photo, yes.
Yeah. I'd like to think it's a nice photograph aesthetically. I think it's a visually compelling image, but that's also part of an entire culture. So to that culture, that's not offensive. But if you're a radical vegan or just a vegan, it might be offensive. And there are plenty of green criminologists who would find that offensive because it's reflecting a speciesist relationship between humans and non-human animals. Now, whether I was offended by it or not is somewhat irrelevant. I just thought that this would fit with our theme. So there was great.
I mean, I remember at that point that it was a group of us that we walked past this place, and I remember the shock of most of the people in the group, and I was thinking, yeah, maybe this could be offensive.
Well, you come to the United States and you see Walmart and you're
I'm offended.
Or you see that there's a Starbucks in every corner, and then some corners they have 2 Starbucks. Maybe that offends you. Or portion sizes. You order a starter and they give you
3 mains.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's also offensive to me, just simply because I tend to think that Americans try to do everything bigger than is necessary. That's a kind of different conversation.
Getting back to the conversation, because we are rambling now. So within criminology, of course, there are many areas. You touched upon multiple of them. So you at some points talked about climate change, biodiversity and species extinction, water insecurity, but also you have a very strong theoretical framework on what is green criminology, what we should understand, how we should, or if we should define criminology as a theoretical framework or just as a concept and so on. But also recently you have been developing a lot and centering your career a lot about merging green criminology and cultural criminology. How do you shape your research agenda? Like how do you design it? How do you say, now I'm going to talk about climate change, but at the same time about biodiversity, and then you are very much focused on green cultural criminology?
Well, I am interested in what Nigel South and I have called green cultural criminology, which is basically adopting some of the motifs or lenses of cultural criminology, but applying them to green crimes and harms. So it's a kind of marriage or merging of the two. And mostly I've been interested in issues of representation. So one of cultural criminology's primary areas of interest is the ways in which crime is depicted in popular culture forms, in news media, the way it's understood, the way those images and stories are misleading. Very rarely does cultural criminology look at these depictions and say, well, that's actually fairly good. So it tends to be a sort of critically oriented approach. And so that's what I've been focusing most on lately is the representations of environmental crimes and harms. I think I have a particular interest in literature, literary depictions. I guess that's the influence of my parents, and I guess that's probably the closest I will become to an English professor. But I also look at film. Occasionally, I'll look at television shows, but I'm not particularly good at watching TV. I feel a little bit guilty trying to watch a Netflix series. But so how do I shape the agenda? I wish I could tell you that it's a sort of careful and
analytical, step by step.
Right. It does not approach the kind of algorithms that interested me when I was making certain kinds of art, or it doesn't really approach even in the way that I would go about studying law. I just kind of read a bunch of stuff and then write about it, and then read more stuff, then write about it, and then put it all together, and then send it out for review. And someone says, "Hey, did you read this?" Or "Why have you cited my work?" Or "This is actually, relate to this." And so it becomes this sort of almost sort of a dialogical kind of process. So there's a lot of stumbling, or a lot of, sort of. There's a phrase that says, even a blind squirrel finds a nut. I'm kind of like the blind squirrel.
And in all this process of creation, you co-authored and build kind of a strong network of authors with whom you tend to be in projects and publish and so on. Who do you identify as the people who shape you the most? You mentioned your beginning with the American Society of Criminology, but over the years, which shape that place? Who inspires you? With who you work?
Well, I would still say that I owe my initial introduction to criminology to Bob and Beth, even though their work is very, very different from the kinds of work that I do. I would not be having this conversation with you in this room were not for Bob Akin and Beth Griffiths. But then those within Green Criminology, Nigel South and Rob White were very influential. Very early on, I met Ragnhild Sutherland at the University of Oslo, who has involved me in lots of her projects and work. Over the years, I've corresponded with Mike Lynch, who's arguably the founding father of green criminology, though, as Nigel South and David Goyes have pointed out, there was plenty of chronological study of environmental crimes and harms prior to Mike Lynch's coining the term, but that he's often credited because his work was in English. So all of those people have been influential and important to me. Tanya Wyatt, I would add to that. Angus Nurse, Nick Groombridge, Reese Walters. If I start listing people, then I'm gonna wind up missing somebody and then offending them, and it's certainly not the case. But all those people have been supportive, encouraging, have tried to push me in different directions, or at least push my thinking, or challenge my thinking. I think I've had the closest relationship with Nigel South, in part because he's such a warm personality and such an easy person to work with. He once said to me that our writing process was sort of back and forth exchange where I would put in a lot of citations and footnotes and kind of overwrite the piece. And he would come in with his sociological scalpel and just cut away all of the legalese and jargon, and then I'd put it back in and he'd take it out. And so it was a constant sort of back and forth of building up and cutting down, building up and cutting down. And so that seems to have worked pretty well over the years. More recently, I've had the privilege of working with Bill McClanahan, who was, I think, a de facto peer the second that he began his master's program at EKU. Now he's a de jure peer. So we've worked on some projects together. My new graduate assistant, Cal Yates, is very promising and exciting, and not sure how much we will actually write together, but I'm very excited to see where their path may go. You and I have collaborated on a couple of writing projects together, though I still feel as if I'm kind of riding on your coattails of these because you've done the research, but we've been able to, I think, apply some interesting lenses or perspectives in the ways in which you've done the work, and I've thought about it from maybe a different angle. So those are the things that keep me inspired and excited. It's both the concern for the environment, profound sadness for the state of the planet.
We've talked about your research and how was it shaped over the last years, but then my question is, how is it moving forward? So where is your direction now? What are your projects? What are your interests? We talked about the green cultural criminology aspect, but what are you working on right now?
Well, what I should be doing is finishing my book called Climate Change as a Crisis of Imagination, which deals with a sort of argument between two individuals about whether or not literature has effectively dealt with the climate crisis. So that book will hopefully be submitted to my publisher at the end of this month. That'll only be about 18 to 23 months later than I should have. Maybe just 18. After that, I have a couple of book chapters and articles that I've agreed to write. I'm most eager, though, to really try to work on a book that focuses just entirely on literary representations of environmental crimes and harms, particularly the ways in which they're depicted for young people. So in children's books and youth, it's called young adult literature. I think that there's been a sort of growth in these kinds of books. Some focus on particular issues or problems. Sometimes it's about sort of development projects encroaching on habitats. Sometimes it's just around an issue of recycling. But they send messages about who's responsible and what the impact of these problems are, or what the potential for solutions are. Some, I think, are more are more helpful than others. And by helpful, I mean in terms of repairing the earth. Others, I think, are problematic. And so I'd really love to do a book that focuses on these representations, divided up by sort of environmental problems. So maybe one on water, one on issues of sort of technology and consumption, one on issues involving non-human animals. So that's a kind of project that's the sort of the next step from what I've been doing now. But the other exciting endeavor is that Nigel South and I were approached about doing a third edition of the Routledge International Handbook of Green Criminology. And I said I would only do it if we could bring along another editor. And so we've invited Anna Jaranko to join us, and we're starting the process of putting together a proposal. I'm hoping that will, what I'd really like it to do is to have entirely new authors and speakers, so no one from the previous editions. I think there's only so much that an author can revise and revisit a chapter that they've published over a number of years, and there's so many people doing green criminology now that I'd like the handbook to be really the new international handbook of green criminology. Actually, it should just be the new handbook of green criminology, because I think the international is somewhat redundant.
Sounds very exciting. The one that you are going to start working on at some point about literature, is it volume 3 or part 3 of green cultural criminology?
I guess it could be thought of that way. It's certainly, I certainly see it as as related to both the climate change as a crisis of imagination book, and to the monstrous nature book that I did with Nigel South. I think it depends on whether or not Nigel would be interested in writing something else in that area with me. If so, then I might do 2 different books. You know, one would be on these representations and literature, which I think interests him a little bit less. But I could see Nigel and I writing something on horror and climate change. We've become very interested in issues of eco-horror representation. I think a book called The Horror of Climate Change, where it's more than just a tragedy. Yeah, Ethan to look at.
Yeah, sounds like it. We are arriving to the end. We have been here for a long time, so I apologize for that. So how do you see the current state? You mentioned that field has growth. There's a lot more people working on green criminology right now. So I think that the follow-up question would be, how do you see the current state of green criminology, and how do you see it evolving?
I think a lot of the work that has really been most important has come about outside of the United States. The European Society of Criminology now has as you know, a working group, because you're involved with the working group and because we're here as a part of that. So I think that the best green criminology is really taking place outside the United States. I think that Europe has been a nice hotspot for that, but there's also been work in Australia. I think David Goyes has been great at bringing in new voices and new perspectives, which is really what it should be. So I think it's becoming much more international, to the point where you really don't need the word international, at least as part of the title. In the United States, that's a little harder to say. There are not a lot of people whom I would consider my generation. The people who are sort of Nigel South, Rob White age are retiring, or have retired. And they're not obviously American. There are some younger scholars emerging, but there aren't a lot of people who are kind of my generation. Those who I would sort of put in that group are people who don't necessarily associate with green criminology as a term. So, Will Moretto, for example, comes at the study of environmental crime and harm through his work with Ron Clark at Rutgers. He takes a very different approach to it than I do, but I don't think that there's anything fundamentally different about what he's interested in, what I'm interested in. I think he just doesn't like the term as much as I do. To me, that's almost irrelevant. So if it involves jettisoning the term green criminology in order to get more people working together, I'm all for it. I'm not methodologically monogamous. I'm not theoretically monogamous. I like, in fact, I think it's more interesting and more exciting to work with people who come at things from different perspectives. Nature is certainly not going to say, we're only going to get better if the proposal comes from someone who's doing green crime science than someone who's doing green cultural criminology. It's just not the way the world works. So if the field is going to continue, or subfield, or however you want to call it, and whatever you want to call it, is going to continue to improve and grow, if the criminological study of environmental crimes and harms is to continue, then it needs to, I think, be a little less siloed, a little less rigid in what it considers this study to be, and a little less rigid in what its name is. We should just do the work together.
Fantastic. Okay, so if you have to give advice to future criminologists, like which gaps do you identify in the field, and you would encourage somebody to pursue?
I think that climate change is really something we could all be working on. Though I think to a large extent, if you look at any issue right now, it's going to somehow implicate climate change, or is somehow going to be connected to climate change. I do think that there has not been enough attention to the oceans and seas. So I think that there is a vast ocean, if you will, of possibilities for exploring marine environments. I think that space is becoming an interesting area. I'm a little skeptical of devoting too much attention to that, because I think there's more stuff that needs to be done on Earth. But if people want to look at ways in which our treatment of our planet is affecting the space in which it exists, then I can understand that connection. I think that biodiversity loss is tragic and horrible, and there's so many ways that we can look at that, whether it's animal abuse, whether it's wildlife trafficking and trade, whether it's the ways in which development encroaches on habitats. And there's so many ways in which that can be looked at. So my advice would simply be for anybody interested in the area to find something that appeals to them. Some issue, some problem, some area of the world that's interesting, troubling, and to pursue that. I think if one were to look at every sort of geographic area that's been studied, every species that's been studied, every problem that's been studied, the gaps are everything that's not there. So you study eels. I think that someone could easily look more closely at crab fisheries. I think that if people don't want to leave the land. They can look more at bees, earthworms. I think that there's just so much to do. So it shouldn't be hard to find a research direction if you're interested in this kind of criminological study.
Kind of, it sense, or the sense is that the outcome of this conversation is that there's work for everybody and space for everybody within green criminology.
Well, certainly there is within green criminology. Whether or not there's work for everybody is a question of
not paid work.
Jobs in higher education, which is an entirely different concern. But if someone has the prospects of studying green criminology and wants to do it, we're not at
plenty of options.
Yes. There's much more data that need to be collected. It's not as if someone studying green criminology can just be given data sets and told to analyze them based on what some professor did as part of one large grant. I mean, there's more to be discovered because we don't even know the full extent of all of the harms that have been committed. We may never know the extent. There are species that become extinct that we didn't even know existed. So to some extent, we're really just beginning to scratch the surface.
Yes. One last question for you, and I will let you go. How would you summarize? So we try to keep it short for the audience. What are the themes that cut across your career and define you as a scholar?
I think a certain degree of intellectual curiosity. My father tells the story of how he would take me to a tennis lesson, and after the tennis lesson, be driving home, and I'd see a sign and say, "What's squash?" Different kind of sport. So I mean, that's kind of who I am. That I've just been a curious individual. So I think a certain curiosity. I think a certain interest in meaning, which I guess comes from anthropology to a large extent, but also incorporates art as well. So a kind of concern with sort of how are things represented, what do they mean? Not so much why this causes that, but what does that relationship do for people? And then the third thing would be sort of literature and reading. We don't read enough. We don't read, period. As I've gotten older, I've become much more, in fact. So I think that I think I've been sort of driven throughout my career to try to bring in as many sources as I can to sort of bolster and support arguments. And as I've explored more and more areas, I've come across more and more things that I think should be read or could be read. I always say that one's reading list should always get longer. It should never be cut down or shortened. And so yeah, I think now there's I feel like almost it's imperative that my work and the messages that I convey to students or to other people working in the area or any area is just read the news, read the papers, read news in papers that you wouldn't read because you think it might be offensive, or read literature, read poetry, just read, but don't tweet or twit or whatever it's called.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate in the interview, for agreeing to be part of this project. It was fantastic to have you here, so thank you.
Well, thank you. This is quite an honor and opportunity.